The rain-slicked alley behind the hospital reeked of damp concrete and overflowing dumpsters, the kind of forgotten corner where shadows clung like old regrets. Sophia Ramirez clutched her scrubs tighter, her heart pounding as the CEO's grip tightened on her arm. Harlan Voss, the man who ran Mercy General like his personal kingdom, had cornered her after her shift, his face twisted in a mask of false concern that didn't reach his eyes. "You think you can just walk away from this?" he hissed, shoving her against the brick wall. The impact jarred her, sending a flicker of pain through her shoulder, but it was the fear in her gut that burned hottest, the fear of what he'd do if she didn't comply with his unspoken demands. Sophia had seen the signs before. The way Voss preyed on the vulnerable, twisting hospital policies into weapons against those who wouldn't play his game. Tonight, it was her turn. She'd reported discrepancies in the supply logs, small thefts that pointed to his embezzlement, and now, here they were in the dead of night with no witnesses but the flickering neon from the emergency room sign. "Please, Mr. Voss," she whispered, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "This isn't right. Just let me go." But he leaned closer, his breath hot and sour, murmuring threats about her job, her future, the fragile life she'd built after so much loss. Miles away, in a dimly lit garage on the outskirts of the city, Ethan Hale wiped grease from his hands on a rag that had seen better days. The hum of engines filled the air, a symphony of loyalty among the Iron Vipers, the motorcycle club he'd led for over a decade. At 42, Ethan carried the weight of his scars like badges, a jagged line across his ribs from a long-ago skirmish in the Desert Wars, and deeper ones from the night he'd lost his first family to a senseless accident. He'd promised himself then, in the sterile quiet of a hospital room much like Sophia's, that he'd never let another soul he loved slip away without a fight. Sophia had been his anchor since, a nurse with eyes that saw through his armor, pulling him from the edge when the nightmares came. His phone buzzed on the workbench, the screen lighting up with her name at 11:47 p.m. Ethan's world narrowed to that vibration. A call he knew wasn't casual. "Soph!" he answered, his voice gravel rough from years of road dust. Her words tumbled out in fragments. "Voss, the alley, help," cut short by a scuffle that made his blood run cold. The line went dead. For a split second, Ethan stood frozen, the garage's fluorescent lights casting long shadows that danced like ghosts of old battles. Then, instinct took over. He grabbed his helmet, the leather worn smooth from countless rides, and strode to his bike, a black beast of chrome and thunder. The Iron Viper's compound stirred like a hive awakening. Ethan didn't need to shout. One word into the club radio, and the call rippled out. "Brothers, we ride now." Headlights pierced the night as 200 engines roared to life, a convoy forming in the gravel lot under a sky heavy with unspoken storms. These weren't just riders, they were Ethan's chosen family, veterans like Marcus, who'd lost a leg in the same war that scarred Ethan, and young guns like Tyler, fresh from the streets, but bound by the code of honor they'd sworn on bloodied patches. They'd buried friends together, stood against crooked cops and rival crews, always upholding the promise, protect your own no matter the cost. Back in the alley, Voss's hand clamped over Sophia's mouth, his other fumbling with the zipper of his coat as if to hide whatever evidence he carried. The rain picked up, drumming on the metal fire escape above, masking her muffled struggles. She twisted, knee connecting with his thigh, but he only laughed, a low, predatory sound that echoed off the walls. "No one's coming for you, sweetheart. You're alone." But Sophia's mind raced to Ethan, to the quiet nights they'd shared stories of survival, how he'd whispered his vow under the stars. "I'll always find you." It was a promise born from his past, from the buddy he'd failed in the sands overseas, a debt he carried like the tattoo on his chest, a coiled viper encircling a broken chain. The first rumble reached her ears then, distant but growing like thunder rolling in from the horizon. Voss paused, head tilting. "What the hell is that?" Sophia's eyes widened, hope flickering amid the terror. The alley's mouth lit up with the glare of headlights, a wall of them, engines snarling as the iron vipers poured in like a tide of justice. Ethan was at the front, his bike cutting through the downpour, rain sheeting off his jacket. He killed the engine and dismounted in one fluid motion, his boots splashing in puddles that reflected the club's colors, deep crimson and steel grey. Voss spun, releasing Sophia as he backed away, his arrogance crumbling. "Who are you people? This is private property." But Ethan's gaze locked on his wife, scanning for signs of harm, his fists clenching at the faint red mark blooming on her cheek. "You touch her again," Ethan said, voice low and unyielding, stepping forward with the weight of 200 brothers at his back, "and you'll wish the rain washed you away." The bikers fanned out, a silent phalanx, their presence alone shifting the air from menace to reckoning. Sophia pushed off the wall, legs shaky, but resolve steeling her. She crossed to Ethan, his arm wrapping around her shoulders like a shield. In that moment, amid the growl of idling motors and the patter of rain, the promise reignited, not just between them, but for the club, for the code that had pulled Ethan from darkness. Voss stammered excuses, but the night had turned. This wasn't the end, it was the spark. Whispers of corruption ran deeper in the hospital's veins, ties to city officials who'd looked the other way for years. Ethan knew it in his bones. This ride would test every oath, unearth secrets buried under layers of power, and force him to confront the ghosts he'd buried with his old life. As the convoy reformed, engines revving in unison, Sophia climbed onto the back of Ethan's bike, her arms around his waist. The Vipers pulled out, a thunderous procession leaving Voss cowering in the shadows. But Ethan glanced back once, eyes hard. The fight for justice had just begun, a moral storm brewing that would demand everything, loyalty, sacrifice, and the unbreaking honor of a man who'd learned the hard way what family truly meant. The city lights blurred into streaks as they rode into the dawn's promise, the road ahead winding toward redemption or ruin. The first light of dawn crept over the city's jagged skyline, painting the Iron Viper's compound in hues of bruised purple and gold. Ethan Hale guided his bike into the gravel lot, the engine's growl fading to a contented purr as he cut the ignition. Sophia dismounted behind him, her scrubs still damp from the rain, clinging like a second skin that carried the night's chill. She leaned into him for a moment, her breath steadying against the broad plane of his back, the scent of leather and rain mingling with the faint metallic tang of fear that hadn't fully dissipated. 200 riders followed in a disciplined wave, their machines lining up like sentinels under the compound's floodlights, exhaust fumes curling into the crisp morning air. Ethan's hand found hers, calloused fingers intertwining with her slender ones, a silent anchor forged in years of shared silences. The club dispersed with quiet efficiency, some heading to the bunkhouse for rest they'd earned, others lingering by the fire pit where embers from last night's watch still glowed. Marcus, the club's grizzled sergeant-at-arms, a man whose prosthetic leg clicked softly on the gravel as he approached, clapped Ethan on the shoulder. "You good, brother?" That suit looked like he'd seen a ghost. His voice was a low rumble, laced with the dry humor that had kept them sane through worse storms. Ethan nodded, but his jaw remained set, eyes distant, scanning the horizon, as if the road could whisper answers. Inside the main hall, a cavernous space of exposed beams and patched leather couches, Sophia sank into an armchair by the window. The room smelled of aged wood and motor oil, a comforting haze that wrapped around her like an old blanket. Ethan poured her a mug of black coffee from the pot on the counter, steam rising in lazy spirals that caught the light filtering through grimy panes. "Talk to me," he said, kneeling before her, his face level with hers, those storm-grey eyes searching, the scar along his jaw tightening with unspoken worry. She'd seen that look before, in the quiet hours after his deployments, when the weight of promises unkept pressed heaviest. Sophia sipped the coffee, its bitterness grounding her. It wasn't just tonight, Ethan. Voss. He's been skimming supplies for months. Medicine meant for patients, funneled to some shadow network. I found records, falsified invoices, deliveries that never reached the wards. When I confronted the head of procurement yesterday, she looked away, like she knew but couldn't say. Her voice cracked on the last word, the vulnerability she'd armored against in the hospital's fluorescent glare, slipping free. Ethan listened, his hand resting on her knee, thumb tracing slow circles. A ritual from their early days, when she'd patched his wounds and he'd mended her heart after her brother's overdose left her adrift. The promise between them had roots deeper than marriage vows. Ethan had met Sophia 5 years ago, in the aftermath of a barroom brawl where he'd pulled a knife from a rival's hand to save a stranger, a kid too much like the ones he'd failed overseas. She'd been the ER nurse who stitched him up, her touch steady amid the chaos, and in her eyes he'd seen a reflection of his own buried grief. "I swore I'd protect what's mine," he told her that night, under the hum of hospital monitors, the words a vow etched into his soul like the viper tattoo. Now, that oath extended to her fight, pulling the entire club into its orbit. Word spread through the compound, like smoke from a backfired engine. Tyler, the youngest viper at 25, with a mop of unruly hair and a quick laugh that hid his own scars from foster homes, gathered a handful of riders around the workbench. Maps of the city unrolled across the scarred surface, marked with pins for key locations. Mercy General, the warehouse district where supplies vanished, and the upscale offices of City Councilman Leland Grant, a name whispered in connection to Voss's schemes. "If it's corruption, we trace the money," Tyler said, his finger jabbing at a root. "Quiet recon first, no guns, no noise. We owe Soph that much." Nods rippled through the group, the club's code humming beneath. Loyalty wasn't shouted. It was ridden out, mile by mile. But Ethan felt the pull of older ghosts, in the quiet of their shared room, a sparse space with a king bed, faded photos of desert sunsets on the walls, and Sophia's nursing textbooks stacked beside his toolbox. He paced, the floorboards creaking under his boots. The call from last night replayed in his mind, her voice breaking like fragile glass. He'd lost too much to hesitation, his squadmate in the sands, gunned down because Ethan had been seconds too slow, his parents in that highway wreck, a promise to call them home, shattered by the road's indifference. Sophia was his redemption, the family he'd chosen when blood ties frayed. Yet confronting Voss meant dredging up his own past, rumors of a military discharge under murky circumstances, ties to investigators who'd once hounded the Vipers for vigilante justice. Sophia rose, crossing to him, her arms slipping around his waist from behind, the warmth of her body pressed against his, a counter to the dawn's encroaching cold. "We face this together," she murmured, her cheek against his shoulder blade. "Not as nurse and biker, but as us." Ethan turned, cupping her face, the faint bruise on her cheek a shadow that fueled the fire in his chest. "Then we start at the source. Tomorrow, we ride to the hospital, not as invaders, but as witnesses. I'll call in favors from old contacts, the ones who owe me from the war." His voice held the steel of resolve, but beneath it, the tremor of doubt. What if this unearthed more than embezzlement? What if Voss's web tangled with powers that could dismantle the club, piece by honorable piece? Outside, the compound stirred fully now, riders prepping bikes with the precision of a ritual. Engines coughed to life sporadically, testing fuel lines and chains, the air vibrating with anticipation. Marcus joined Ethan at the door, handing him a burner phone. "Got a tip from a nurse buddy of Soph's. Voss is meeting someone tonight. Warehouse on Elm Street. Could be hour in." Ethan's grip tightened on the device, the plastic creaking. The road ahead twisted with moral shadows. Expose the truth without becoming the monsters they fought. Honor the promise without sacrificing the family that made it whole. As the sun climbed higher, gilding the chrome on their machines, Sophia watched from the porch, her resolve mirroring Ethan's. The city sprawled before them, a labyrinth of steel and secrets, but in that moment, under the vast sky, their bond felt unbreakable, a chosen legacy of quiet courage. Yet the rumble of approaching thunder, distant and ominous, hinted at storms yet to break, testing the very honor that bound them. The ride continued, not just on asphalt, but through the unyielding terrain of the soul, where justice demanded sacrifice and redemption waited in the balance. The midday sun beat down on the Iron Viper's compound like a relentless interrogator, turning the gravel into a shimmering haze that distorted the air. Ethan Hale stood at the edge of the lot, his silhouette etched against the sprawl of bikes lined up like faithful hounds. The warehouse tip burned in his pocket, the burner phone a weight heavier than the chain around his neck. Sophia had insisted on coming along for the recon, her nursing bag swapped for a leather jacket that hung loose on her frame, but Ethan could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she scanned the horizon as if expecting Voss's shadow to creep from the city limits. "We do this smart," he said, his voice carrying over the sporadic rev of a testing engine. "Eyes only. No confrontations until we know the players." Marcus nodded from his perch on a crate, polishing the grip of a flashlight with a rag, his prosthetic leg extended like a silent testament to battles won and lost. The club had gathered in loose clusters, maps folded and refolded until creases mapped their resolve. Tyler paced nearby, his youthful energy coiled tight, fingers drumming on the handlebars of his customized Harley. "Elm Street's a snake pit after dark," he muttered, eyes flicking to Sophia. "Fences, guards, probably more than Voss's errand boys. If Grant's involved, we're talking city muscle." The name hung in the air, a spectre of the corruption Sophia had glimpsed in those falsified logs. Councilman Leland Grant, whose donations to Mercy General masked kickbacks from diverted medical supplies. Sophia met Tyler's gaze, her dark hair tied back in a practical knot, the faint shadow on her cheek a reminder that faded but didn't vanish. "I know the risks, but if we don't map this out, more patients suffer, kids waiting for meds that end up in some black market vault." Her words carried the quiet authority of someone who'd held hands through final breaths, who'd seen the human cost of greed up close. Ethan watched her, the promise he'd made in that ER 5 years ago echoing in his chest. Protect her, protect them all. It was the same vow that had bound him to the Vipers after the desert, when he'd washed sand from his boots and sworn never to let loyalty fracture again. As dusk bled into the sky, painting the compound in strokes of amber and indigo, the convoy assembled with the precision of a heartbeat. 20 riders, hand-picked for their stealth, veterans who knew silence as well as speed, formed the core, their engines muffled to low growls. Ethan led on point, Sophia's arms secure around his waist, the road unfolding like a vein, pulsing toward the city's underbelly. The wind whipped past, carrying the scent of cooling asphalt and distant sea salt, a sensory tether that grounded him amid the rising churn in his gut. Flashes of memory intruded, the crack of gunfire in foreign dunes, the metallic tang of blood on his tongue, the face of his fallen brother in arms, whose last words had been a plea to keep the promise. Ethan shook it off, focusing on the taillights ahead, red eyes in the gathering twilight. Elm Street warehouse district loomed as a fortress of rusting metal and chain link, floodlights casting stark pools that swallowed the shadows between. The Vipers split into pairs, ghosts on wheels, circling the perimeter without a word. Ethan and Sophia parked in the lee of an abandoned truck, the bike's heat radiating against their legs as they dismounted. From their vantage, the main building squatted like a beast at rest, loading docks yawning open to reveal crates stamped with hospital insignia, supplies meant for healing, now pawns in a darker game. "There," Sophia whispered, pointing to a side entrance where a black sedan idled, its tinted windows reflecting the moon's sliver. Voss emerged first, his suit rumpled from the day's facade, flanked by two burly figures whose postures screamed hired muscle. He glanced over his shoulder, paranoia etching lines deeper into his face, before sliding into the warehouse. Moments later, another car pulled up, a sleek town car that screamed influence. Out stepped Leland Grant, silver-haired and impeccably tailored, his smile a politician's mask as he clasped Voss's hand. The rider's earpieces crackled softly with updates. Tyler's voice, hushed, confirming guards at the rear, Marcus spotting a ledger exchanged under the dim interior lights. Ethan crouched lower, his breath sinking with Sophia's, the air thick with the brine of nearby docks and the faint acrid whiff of chemicals from within, stolen pharmaceuticals, no doubt. But as Grant leaned in, murmuring words lost to the distance, a flicker of movement caught Ethan's eye. A third figure, hooded and slight, slipped from the shadows near the sedan, not a guard, but someone watching. Phone pressed to ear. Ethan's instincts flared. This wasn't just a handoff, it was a web, strands pulling toward something bigger, perhaps the very authorities the Vipers had skirted for years. Sophia's hand tightened on his arm, her whisper urgent. "That's the procurement head from the hospital. She's in on it. Deep." The betrayal stung, a mirror to Ethan's own doubts. How many loyalties had he questioned in the war, only to find rot beneath? Tension coiled as a guard patrolled closer, flashlight beams slicing the night like a blade. Ethan signaled retreat, the Vipers melting back into the darkness, engines silent until they cleared the district. On the ride back, the wind howled louder, carrying Sophia's silence like a weight. At the compound, under the stars that wheeled overhead, the group reconvened around the fire pit, flames dancing shadows across determined faces. Tyler sketched the layout on a napkin, pins marking entry points, but Ethan's mind raced ahead, to the moral fork. Expose this quietly, through channels that might ignore them, or ride harder, risking the club's fragile peace with the law. Sophia stood beside him, her presence a steady flame. "We can't let fear dictate," she said, voice threading through the crackle of wood. "Your promise, our promise. It's about standing for what's right, even when it scars." Ethan nodded, pulling her close, the fire's warmth a pale echo of the bond that had survived alleys and wars. Yet as the night deepened, the burner buzzed again. An anonymous text. Coordinates to another meet, laced with a warning, "Stop digging or the Vipers fall." The threat landed like a punch, stirring ghosts Ethan thought buried. Redemption wasn't a straight road. It twisted through loyalty's fire, demanding he choose, not just for Sophia, but for the family forged in chrome and thunder. Marcus doused the fire, embers hissing into ash. As the club dispersed with murmurs of plans refined, Ethan lingered, staring into the dying glow, the city's distant hum a reminder that justice waited not in vengeance, but in the unyielding honor of the ride. The dawn would bring decisions, tests of the soul that could bind them tighter or shatter the chain. For now, in the quiet aftermath, the promise held, a beacon against the encroaching storm. The compound's floodlights hummed softly in the pre-dawn hush, casting elongated shadows across the gravel that crunched under Ethan's boots as he paced the perimeter fence. The burner phone lay discarded on a nearby workbench, its screen dark, but the threat etched into his memory like a fresh scar. "Stop digging, or the Vipers fall." Sophia slept fitfully inside, her form curled under a quilt in their room, but Ethan couldn't shake the coil of unease twisting in his gut. The warehouse recon had peeled back layers of Voss's operation, crates of pilfered meds stacked like illicit treasures. Grant's polished handshake sealing deals that starved hospital beds, but the hooded figure, the procurement head's furtive glances, hinted at fractures deeper than embezzlement. This was institutional rot, the kind that ensnared good people in silence, mirroring the moral quagmires Ethan had navigated in desert patrols where orders clashed with conscience. He paused by the fire pit, now cold and ashen, kicking at a stray ember that refused to die. Marcus joined him without a word, his limp more pronounced in the chill. A thermos of coffee passed between them like a shared sacrament. "That text ain't bluff," Marcus said, steam rising from his mug, the bitter aroma cutting through the night's damp earthiness. "Sounds like they've got eyes on us. Cops? Feds? Or worse, someone from our past." Ethan's jaw tightened, the scar along his ribs itching under his shirt, a phantom pull from old wounds. The Vipers had danced on the edge of the law before, aiding flood victims when official aid lagged, or standing sentinel for abused families shunned by the system. But this, exposing a councilman, meant inviting scrutiny that could unravel the club's patchwork of favors and fragile alliances, testing the promise Ethan had forged with these men. Lead with honor, not recklessness. By sunrise, the compound buzzed with restrained energy, bikes gleaming under dew-kissed chrome as riders tuned engines with methodical care, the clink of wrenches, the hiss of air tools blending into a rhythm of readiness. Tyler approached Ethan near the main hall, a tablet in hand, displaying grainy footage from a hidden cam one of the scouts had planted during recon. "Look at this," Tyler urged, his voice low, eyes shadowed by the bill of his cap. The video captured Voss and Grant in the warehouse's dim glow, voices muffled but gestures clear, a briefcase exchanged, nods sealing pacts. Then, the hooded figure, Sophia's colleague Eleanor, her face half obscured but unmistakable, slipping a USB drive into Voss's pocket. "She's the key," Tyler said. "If we flip her, the whole chain unravels." But Ethan's gaze lingered on Elena's hesitant posture, the way her shoulders slumped, a woman trapped, perhaps, by threats mirroring Sophia's own. Sophia emerged from the hall, her hair tousled, carrying 2 plates of eggs, scrambled with whatever scraps the cook had rustled up. The scent of sizzling peppers wafted, grounding the tension as she handed one to Ethan. "I know Elena," she said, forking a bite, her eyes meeting his over the steam. "She's got a kid, single mom. Voss probably has leverage, debts, fabricated complaints. We approach her right, offer protection, and she talks." It was the nurse in her speaking, the one who'd bandaged wounds without judgment, seeing redemption in the broken. Ethan nodded, but doubt gnawed. His military days had taught him that leverage cut both ways, and one wrong move could drag innocence into the crossfire. The promise to Sophia, to shield her world, now extended to Elena, pulling the Vipers toward a delicate balance of justice and mercy. The decision crystallized over the morning's council in the hall, sunlight slanting through cracked windows to illuminate faces etched with loyalty. 20 riders crammed into the space, the air thick with the tang of oil and fresh brew, maps pinned to walls like battle plans. Ethan stood at the head, his voice steady as gravel under tires. "We don't storm in. We invite Elena out, neutral ground, a diner on the edge of town. Sophia leads the talk. The rest of us watch from afar." Murmurs of agreement rippled, Marcus's fist thumping the table in solidarity. Tyler hacked a quick message from a dummy account, luring Elena with a vague, concerned colleague plea to meet at noon. As the group dispersed, Ethan pulled Sophia aside, his hands framing her face, thumbs brushing the fading mark on her cheek. "If this goes south, you ride with me. No heroics." Her smile was soft, fierce. "That's our promise, Ethan. Together." The diner squatted on a forgotten stretch of highway, its neon sign flickering open against a sky heavy with gathering clouds, the lot dotted with semis and the occasional local rig. Ethan and a skeleton crew arrived early, bikes parked discreetly in the rear, out of sight, but engines primed for quick exodus. He watched from a booth's edge, nursing black coffee that tasted of regret, as Sophia entered alone, her jacket zipped against the wind that carried hints of rain and distant exhaust. Elena arrived 10 minutes later, her nurse's scrubs swapped for jeans and a hoodie, eyes darting like a cornered animal. They slid into a corner booth, the vinyl creaking under them, the clatter of plates and murmur of truckers masking their words. Sophia's voice carried softly to Ethan's earpiece, hidden under his collar. "I know what you're carrying, Elena. The fear, the choices, but Voss, he's poisoning everything we stand for." Elena's hands trembled around her water glass, condensation beading like unshed tears. "You don't understand. Grant's people. They own the board. One word and I'm fired, or worse, my son." The confession spilled in fragments, coerced entries in the logs, threats to expose fabricated drug errors, a web of intimidation that snared her after a desperate loan from the hospital's fund. Ethan's grip tightened on his mug, the ceramic warm against his palm, fury simmering at the exploitation. This was the corruption's human toll. Families fractured, oaths twisted into chains. Outside, Tyler's voice crackled in the earpiece. "Eyes on a tail. Black SUV, 2 blocks back." Ethan's pulse quickened, signaling Marcus to ready the flanks. Inside, Sophia leaned closer, her tone unyielding yet kind. "The Vipers aren't vigilantes. We're family, chosen, unbreakable. Join us, testify, and we'll shield you both." Elena hesitated, tears tracing silent paths down her cheeks, the diner's jukebox crooning a forgotten ballad about lost roads. Then a nod, small, seismic. "The files. On a drive in my locker. But you have to move fast. Meeting tonight. Bigger players." As Elena slipped out the back, Sophia emerged into the lot, the wind tugging at her hair, relief and resolve mingling in her eyes. Ethan met her halfway, pulling her into a brief, fierce embrace, the leather of his cut creaking against her jacket. But the SUV rounded the corner too smoothly, tires whispering threats on the asphalt. Engines roared to life behind them, the Vipers forming a protective arc as Ethan gunned his bike, Sophia clinging tight. The chase blurred into a high-speed ballet through industrial backstreets, horns blaring, the acrid bite of brakes and rubber filling the air. They shook the tail at a rail yard, vanishing into the maze of freight cars, hearts pounding in sync. Back at the compound as twilight fell, the retrieved drive yielded digital gold. Emails, transfers, names linking Voss and Grant to a syndicate siphoning aid from the vulnerable. Yet the victory tasted bittersweet, Elena's fear a reminder of the ethical tightrope, expose without destroying, honor without vengeance. Ethan stood on the porch with Sophia, the city lights twinkling like distant promises, his arm around her waist. "One step closer," he murmured, the weight of their shared vow anchoring him. But the burner buzzed anew, a photo of the compound gate, time-stamped minutes ago. The storm closed in, demanding sacrifices that would test the soul's unyielding core, where loyalty's fire forged true redemption. If this tale of quiet courage is stirring something in you, smash that like button. It helps spread these stories of honor and heart to more riders on the road. The compound's perimeter lights flickered like wary eyes in the deepening twilight, casting jagged pools of yellow across the chain-link fence that rattled faintly in the rising wind. Ethan Hale gripped the porch railing, the wood rough under his palms, as he stared at the burner's screen. The photo of their gate, time-stamped just 20 minutes prior, a silent intrusion that chilled the air more than the encroaching chill. Sophia stood beside him, her shoulder brushing his. the warmth of her presence a fragile bulwark against the encroaching dread. The drive's contents burned in his mind. Encrypted files detailing kickbacks from pilfered supplies. Voss's emails to Grant outlining diversions that left low-income clinics barren. And Elena's coerced signatures sealing the deceit. It was proof enough to topple empires, but the photo whispered of watchers, of a net tightening around the Viper's hard-won sanctuary. Inside the main hall, the air hung heavy with the scent of cooling coffee and the faint ozone of electronics as Tyler hunched over a laptop on the scarred oak table. His fingers flew across the keys, decrypting the last layers of the drive, the screen's glow illuminating the furrow in his brow. Marcus leaned against the wall, arms crossed over his broad chest, the click of his prosthetic leg punctuating the tense silence like a metronome counting down to confrontation. "Eyes on us means they're desperate," Marcus rumbled, his voice a low thunder that echoed the storm clouds gathering overhead. "Voss knows we're closing in, that photo. It's a warning shot. Next one's aimed at our backs." Ethan nodded, pocketing the burner, the device's edge digging into his thigh like a reminder of debts unpaid. The promise he'd made to Sophia in that rain-soaked alley had swelled into something vast, encompassing not just her safety, but the club's code, stand for the voiceless, even when the cost carved deeper scars. Sophia paced the room's edge, her boots scuffing the worn floorboards, the leather jacket she'd borrowed from the club's spares creaking with each step. The files had named names, doctors pressured into silence, board members greased with offshore accounts, but Elena's story lingered heaviest, a thread of reluctant complicity woven from fear for her son. "We can't just leak this anonymously," Sophia said, stopping to face Ethan, her eyes fierce in the lamplight. "It needs to hit where it hurts. The public, the patients, a press drop timed with Elena's testimony, but if they strike first." Her voice trailed, the unspoken weight of the photo hanging between them. Ethan crossed to her, his hand cupping the nape of her neck, thumb tracing the tense cord of muscle there, a gesture born from nights when words failed, only touch bridging the chasm of shared burdens. The council reconvened under the hall's vaulted ceiling, riders filtering in with the quiet resolve of men who'd stared down worse horizons. 20 strong, they formed a semicircle around the table, the air vibrating with the low murmur of voices and the distant rumble of thunder rolling in from the sea. Tyler projected the files onto a makeshift screen, a white sheet tacked to the wall, highlights flashing, transaction logs siphoning antibiotics from pediatric wards, Voss's scrawled notes on disposal fees that funneled cash to Grant's campaign slush funds. "This ends lives," Tyler said, his usual spark dimmed by the gravity, pointing to a ledger entry for insulin diverted to a ghost distributor. "Kids like Elena's boy, waiting in lines that never shorten." Nods rippled through the group, faces hardened by personal ghosts. Lost siblings to untreated illnesses, veterans denied care in a system rigged for the powerful. Ethan stepped forward, his shadow stretching long across the floor, the viper tattoo peeking from his collar like a sentinel. "We ride at midnight, split teams. One shadows Voss's penthouse for any last-minute moves, another secures Elena and her kid at a safe house upstate. The rest, we deliver the package to a journalist I know from the old days, clean, no ties to the club." His words carried the steel of command, but beneath pulsed the ethical churn. Exposure meant dragging innocence into the light, risking Elena's fragile trust, and potentially painting the Vipers as meddlers in eyes that saw only outlaws. Marcus met his gaze, a silent question in the tilt of his head. Hadn't Ethan's discharge stemmed from a similar stand, leaking intel on corrupt contractors overseas? Only to be branded a whistleblower gone rogue, the promise to his fallen squadmate echoed, "Keep fighting the shadows, no matter the fallout." As the meeting broke, Sophia pulled Ethan into the shadowed alcove by the bunkhouse door, the cool metal frame pressing against his back. Rain began to patter on the tin roof, a soft percussion that masked the quickening of her breath. "This could break us," she whispered, her fingers twisting in his shirt, the fabric bunching under her grip. "The club, our life, if Grant pulls strings with the DA." Ethan silenced her with a kiss, fierce and grounding, tasting the salt of worry on her lips. It was the anchor they'd built from fragments, her steady hands in the ER, his unyielding ride through storms. "Then we rebuild," he murmured against her forehead, the rain's rhythm syncing with his heartbeat. "The promise isn't about easy wins. It's about choosing right when the road forks dark." She nodded, leaning into him, the moment a brief harbor before the tide pulled them out. Midnight cloaked the convoy in velvet black, engines muffled to whispers as the Vipers sliced through the city's veins. Ethan led the core team toward the waterfront safe house, Sophia's arms locked around him, the wind slicing cold through their jackets, carrying the briny tang of the harbor and the undercurrent of diesel from lurking ships. Flashes of the warehouse recon haunted him, the hooded Elena's slump, Voss's predatory leer in the alley, fueling the resolve that burned hotter than fear. They arrived under a sky fractured by lightning, the safe house, a nondescript bungalow shrouded in overgrown ivy. Its windows dark, but for a single lamp flickering like a beacon. Elena waited on the porch, her son, a wide-eyed boy of 8 clutching a stuffed bear, huddled beside her, the rain sheeting off the eaves in silver curtains. Relief etched her features as Sophia dismounted, rushing forward with an umbrella scavenged from the bike's saddlebag. "We move now," Sophia said, her voice steady amid the downpour, helping them into the van Marcus had prepped. But as the boy climbed in, a glint caught Ethan's eye, headlights piercing the mist 2 blocks down, too deliberate for coincidence. "Go!" he barked, swinging onto his bike, the engine snarling to life as the van peeled out. The pursuing vehicle, a unmarked sedan, gave chase, tires hissing on wet pavement, the pursuit weaving through rain-slicked alleys where sodium lamps bloomed like hazy oranges. Ethan and Tyler flanked the van, bikes leaning into turns with the precision of old instincts, the roar of exhaust mingling with thunderclaps that shook the ground. Bullets? No. This was intimidation, a blacked-out cruiser trying to box them in at a narrow bridge, its sirens silent but lights flashing a warning blue. Ethan's mind raced, Grant's pull no doubt city enforcers blurring lines between duty and corruption. He signaled Tyler, who veered left into a construction detour, buying seconds as Ethan gunned ahead, cutting off the cruiser with a controlled slide that sprayed water like shrapnel. The standoff held for a heartbeat, headlights blinding, rain blurring the driver's scowl, before the cruiser backed off, vanishing into the storm as if reconsidering the cost. The safe house upstate swallowed them by dawn, a rustic cabin nestled in fog-shrouded pines, the air crisp with the scent of wet earth and pine sap. Elena collapsed onto a threadbare couch, her son asleep in her lap, while Sophia brewed tea on a wood stove, steam curling like unspoken prayers. Ethan stepped outside, the porch groaning under his weight, dialing the journalist, a grizzled vet named Harlan, who'd covered Ethan's unit back in the day, owing a debt from a tip that broke a scandal. "It's time," Ethan said into the phone, voice low against the patter of residual rain. The files transferred in encrypted bursts, Harlan's gruff promise echoing. "This'll light a fire under the right asses." But as Ethan hung up, a new text buzzed. Coordinates to Voss's emergency meet, bait, or trap, luring them deeper into the moral maelstrom. Back inside, Sophia joined him, her hand finding his in the dim light, the warmth of vow renewed. The ride had shaken them, close calls etching fresh lines of doubt. But the bond held, a chosen family expanding to shield the fragile. Yet the storm's eye approached, demanding Ethan confront not just Voss's empire, but the shadows within. Could he expose the rot without tainting the honor that defined them? The pines whispered secrets in the wind, The path ahead, a gauntlet of sacrifice, where redemption's flame tested the unbreaking core of loyalty. The fog clung to the pines like a shroud, as dawn's first light filtered through the canopy, turning the upstate cabin into a hazy sanctuary of splintered wood and whispered winds. Ethan Hale stood on the sagging porch, the rough-hewn boards creaking under his weight, the chill seeping through his boots like an uninvited doubt. The burner phone's latest message burned in his pocket. Coordinates to an abandoned mill on the city's edge, Voss's emergency meet, scrawled with a taunt, "Come alone, or the nurse pays." It was bait, reeking of desperation, the kind that made corrupt men sloppy. But Ethan knew better. Voss's web had frayed, the files now in Harlan's hands. A ticking bomb primed to explode in tomorrow's headlines. The promise that had started in a rain-lashed alley had led here, to this precipice where honor demanded one final ride, not into vengeance, but into the light of truth. Inside, the cabin's single room hummed with subdued life. Sophia knelt by the wood stove, stirring a pot of oatmeal that filled the air with the comforting scent of cinnamon and oats, a small act of normalcy amid the storm's aftermath. Eleanor sat at the scarred kitchen table, her son dozing against her side, his small chest rising and falling in the rhythm of innocence preserved. The woman's eyes, red-rimmed but clearer now, met Sophia's with a gratitude that needed no words. The files she'd surrendered had cracked the syndicate wide, exposing not just embezzlement, but a chain of neglect that had cost lives in the shadows of Mercy General. "I thought I was protecting him," Elena murmured, stroking her boy's hair, the faint crackle of the fire underscoring her confession. "Voss made it seem like the only way. But you showed me there's another road." Sophia glanced toward the door, her heart pulling toward Ethan, the man whose quiet strength had woven their fates together. 5 years ago, in the sterile hum of the ER, he'd been the battered rider she'd pieced back together, his scars a map of losses she'd traced with gentle fingers. Now, those same hands steadied a mug of tea for Elena, the steam rising like fragile hope. "We all carry weights we didn't choose," Sophia said softly, her voice threading through the room's warmth. "But family, the one we build, lifts them. The Vipers aren't just bikes and leather. They're the promise kept when the world turns cold." Eleanor nodded, a tentative smile breaking through, the first crack in her armor of fear. Outside, Marcus and Tyler patrolled the tree line, their silhouettes ghosts in the mist, ensuring no shadows from the city had followed. Ethan's phone vibrated again, Harlan's voice crackling through on a secure line. "Files check out, airtight. I'm running it with a partner at the Times. Raids by noon. But if Voss bolts—" The journalist's words trailed into static, but the implication hung heavy. The meet was a last gasp, a cornered rat's scramble. Ethan ended the call, his breath fogging the chill air as he leaned against the porch rail, the distant call of a loon echoing across the fog-bound lake like a mournful sentinel. The ghosts of his past stirred then, the sand-swept face of his squadmate, eyes pleading in the final moments, the twisted wreckage of his parents' car, a promise shattered on rain-slicked highway. He'd failed them once, hesitation carving hollows in his soul. But Sophia, the Vipers, Elena's fragile trust, they were the redemption he'd chased mile after mile, a chosen legacy forged in loyalty's unyielding fire. By mid-morning, the cabin stirred with purpose. Marcus rigged a satellite link for real-time updates, his prosthetic leg steady as he wired the setup, the faint whir of electronics blending with the sizzle of breakfast. Tyler sketched escape routes on a napkin, his quick lines mapping back roads that snaked through the hills, away from Grant's reach. "We go in light," Ethan announced, stepping inside, his presence drawing all eyes like a compass needle. "Me and Soph to the mill, draw Voss out." "You three shadow. Clean extraction if it sours." Protests murmured, but his gaze silenced them, the weight of command tempered by the vulnerability in his eyes when they flicked to Sophia. She rose, crossing to him, her hand slipping into his, calluses meeting softness in a grip that spoke volumes. "Together," she whispered, echoing their vow. The one born under hospital lights and sealed on endless roads. The ride back unfolded under a sky clearing to fractured blue, the convoy a low growl through winding lanes where leaves rustled like secrets in the breeze. Ethan led, Sophia's arms a steady anchor around his waist, the wind carrying the earthy tang of damp soil and pine resin, cleansing the night's residue. The mill loomed on the city's frayed outskirts, a skeletal relic of rusted girders and crumbling brick, its windows shattered eyes staring into the haze. They parked in the shadow of overgrown weeds, engines cutting to silence, broken only by the drip of water from eaves and the distant hum of traffic. Voss's sedan idled at the far end, a lone figure pacing beside it, his suit disheveled. The arrogance from the alley stripped to raw nerves. Ethan dismounted first, helmet tucked under his arm, Sophia at his side like an equal in the fray. "Voss!" he called, voice carrying clear across the cracked lot, the gravel crunching under their boots. The CEO spun, face paling at the sight of them, his hand twitching toward his pocket. "You think this ends it? I own this city. Grant, the board. They'll bury you." But his words faltered as sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder, a symphony of approaching justice. Ethan stepped closer, unflinching, the sun glinting off his viper patch like a badge of honor. "It's over because of promises kept, not yours, the ones we hold to for the ones who can't fight back." Sophia's hand brushed his, a silent affirmation. Her presence, the moral compass that had guided them through the storm. Voss lunged then, desperation twisting his features, but Marcus materialized from the shadows, restraining him with a grip like iron. Tyler securing the briefcase that tumbled free. More ledgers, frantic notes of escape. Federal agents swarmed the lot moments later, badges flashing under the climbing sun, Arlen's tip bearing fruit in cuffs that clicked like final judgments. Grant's name topped the warrants, his empire crumbling in real-time broadcasts that would soon flood the airwaves. Voss's eyes darted to Sophia, a final snarl dying on his lips as realization dawned. He dragged a nurse into darkness, unaware she carried the thunder of 200 souls. As the agents hauled Voss away, the mill's shadow receding in the midday glare, Ethan pulled Sophia close, the scent of her hair, faint lavender amid the dust, grounding him. The vipers reformed around them, engines purring in victory's hush, Marcus clapping Ethan's back with a grin that split his weathered face. Elena's testimony, secured and safe, would seal the case, her son's future, a beacon reclaimed. Back at the compound by dusk, the hall filled with the club's full roar, 200 riders toasting with mugs of ale, the air alive with laughter and the low strum of guitars, stories of the ride weaving into legend. Ethan and Sophia slipped away to the porch, the city lights twinkling below like stars grounded, the weight of the day lifting in the cool evening breeze. "We did it," she murmured. Head on his shoulder, the faint scar of the alley, a memory faded to strength. He kissed her temple, the promise complete. Not in grand gestures, but in the quiet honor that had bound them, redeemed them through corruption's gale. The road stretched endless, but with family chosen and oaths unbroken, every horizon held the light of justice earned. Thank you for riding along on this journey of unbreakable bonds and moral fire. If stories of loyalty and redemption like Ethan's touch your soul, subscribe now and join us for more tales that honor the heart of the open road.